Upon waking up, Li Yu became the guardian of the cemetery. By mortifying, collecting, sewing, and fulfilling the deceased's wishes, he can receive various rewards. And whether it's decaying maggots, foul-smelling corpses, or telepathic ancient corpses that are not corrupted by Vajra or have fled to heaven or earth, or immortal corpses that have fallen from the ancient immortal realm, they cannot escape this rule. Soul-slaying saber technique, dragon and snake treasure record, Taibai essence gold, innate 5 thunder body, immortal Hades king skill, Taiyuan golden stove, dragon and tiger golden dan jade liquid classic, creation green lotus, Taiyin demon slaying saber classic. Li Yu is practicing the practice of burying corpses in the Yizhuang, gradually proving the fruits of longevity. Sitting there, he watches the ups and downs of the outside world and the vicissitudes of life. Until one day, when he saw a figure riding a green ox, with white hair and a bright and purple aura stretching for 90,000 miles behind him, he was surprised to realize that the world seemed far from as simple as he had imagined. This book is also known as I Shou Changxing in Yizhuang, and I was buried in Yizhuang for 1,000 years, born into the invincible world. Keywords of the novel. Those years when I was a corpse guardian in Yizhuang had no pop-ups. Those years when I was a corpse guardian in Yizhuang. Download the complete TXT collection, and read the latest chapters of Those Years When I Was a Corpse Guardian in Yizhuang. Chapter 1. Bodyguard of Yizhuang. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Bodyguard of Yizhuang. In the wilderness, on a hillside stands a dilapidated charity estate. At this moment, the sky outside was dim, the cold wind was howling, and inside the Yizhuang, it was even more silent. Azu. The cold wind blew in through the cracks on the earthen wall, causing the newly awakened Li Yu to sneeze and his nose to flow out. With a casual wipe of his sleeve, Li Yu leaned down and pulled out a cloth bag from the bed. When he saw several kilograms of brown rice inside, as well as 7 or 8 sweet potatoes and potatoes of different sizes next to him, and a bundle of dried wild vegetables, he couldn't help but be stunned. Isn't that right? Is that all? Who can eat enough of this little thing? Roast is roast, but Li Yu has to face the fact that these things are his food for winter this year. It's really shabby. Li Yu sighed. In his past life, he was at least a demolition household. His family received an 8-figure demolition payment and was also divided into 2 houses. Not to mention that he was tired of the delicacies, at least he was not worried about food and drink, and had plenty of meat and fish. How could he have suffered such injustice? According to the memories of its predecessors, this world is now in a feudal agricultural era with low productivity. Due to years of drought and flood disasters, as well as harsh taxes, many people may not even be able to eat corn flour, sweet potatoes, and potatoes. In these days, it's good to not starve to death, but where else can he be the one to nitpick? That's right, Li Yu is a guest from a different world. His predecessor's name was Li Yu, with only 1 word difference from his name. He was originally a refugee and was adopted by the lane corpse guardian of the Yizhuang. He had a quiet and reserved personality, and his mind was not very bright. After the old cripple passed away, Li Yu naturally became a guardian of the corpse and barely made a living by relying on this charity estate. Last night, a masked black figure sneaked into Yizhuang. While his predecessor was up at night, he quickly fixed his body with a single finger, then tied his hands and cut open his waist. After taking off 2 of his waist, he quietly left. After being suffocated by the predecessor of Gyazi, the body and most of the memory were inherited by the passing Li Yu. Strangely, when Li Yu woke up, the wound on his waist and abdomen disappeared, and he didn't feel any discomfort, which was very strange. Of course, Li Yu, who had digested most of his predecessor's memories, quickly accepted this. Gain's world seems different from his previous life. This world is called Qianyuan, similar to his ancient past, but there are actually some incredible powers present. When the old cripple was young, he studied in a private school for several years. Later, there was a change in his family, and he sold wild medicine and even joined a caravan. He had a wide range of knowledge, but he also witnessed or heard of many things from Tuesday. The old cripple once told his predecessor that there are many strange people and scholars in this world. For example, there are evil people who are proficient in the art of animal husbandry. They can peel off the skin of black dogs and monkeys and wrap them on children while they are hot, turning them into monkey dogs, performing on the streets to make money, or turning them into livestock such as cows, horses, donkeys, and sheep to sell for money. There are also goo masters who are good at raising goo, who can drive 100 goo to harm and save people. Once ordinary people offend goo masters, they often die without knowing how. There are also some evil cultivation techniques that can drive away zombies and harm people. In addition, there are also martial artists with steel tendons and iron bones, who pull the tail of a cow upside down, and even legendary cultivators with great powers who see the head but not the tail. Thinking back to last night, Li Yu did not doubt the words of the old cripple, who was able to cut his kidneys with just one flesh palm. However, in the stable and peaceful social environment of his past life, Li Yu suddenly came into such a mysterious and dangerous world, which made him feel uneasy and uneasy. But the world is vast, eating is the biggest. He has an empty stomach now, exhausted from hunger, and has no intention of daydreaming. He decided to fill his stomach first. This body is not very old, only around 17 years old, but due to years of malnutrition, it is somewhat thin and frail, looking like a bamboo pole. At this age, it is the time when the appetite is the greatest and the most delicious. Li Yu found a gap in the porcelain bowl and filled it with a handful of brown rice. He also grabbed a few wild vegetables and pushed the door to the hall. On one side of the hall, there is a thin-skinned yellow coffin with a grave inscription engraved on it. The lid of the coffin is tightly fastened, and next to it are several simple wooden beds. On one of the wooden beds lay a corpse covered in white cloth, forming a humanoid silhouette that was cold and stiff. A faint putrid smell came, making people nauseous. However, Li Yu has already become accustomed to it, or rather his body has already become accustomed to it. This is the Yizhuang, and having a corpse is a natural occurrence. These two corpses were just delivered yesterday. Inside the coffin is Chen Zhua, the son of an old innkeeper in Qingshui town, who is more than 10 miles away. On the wooden bed is an old bachelor named Long Wu from the neighboring Guijia village. The former is an alcoholic, addicted to alcohol. After drinking too much, he plunged his head into a ditch on the street. No one noticed him at night, but the next day when he went to look for him, he found out he had drowned. And that ditch is only over half a meter deep. The latter is even more straightforward, frozen to death. This kind of thing is very common, and there is a similar situation every winter. Li Yu is not surprised. In recent years, having a coffin to bury oneself after death has become a coveted thing for many poor people. Most of them cannot even eat enough, and even have to take turns wearing a single piece of clothing. If they die, they can at most find a straw mat to wrap around and bury it in the soil, which is considered the end of the matter. Li Yu glanced at the frozen purple arm exposed under the white cloth. He simply lifted the cloth and stuffed his arm into it, not daring to look at the stiff, lifeless face. Coming outside, the chilly wind crawled straight into the clothes through the cracks, like a blade, causing pain to the skin and flesh. Li Yu cleaned the brown rice and dried wild vegetables briefly, then soaked them in water. Brush the iron pot clean again, wait for the water to boil, then add brown rice and dried wild vegetables. After cooking quickly, Li Yu quickly poured some water and extinguished the fire. These firewood are essential supplies for winter and need to be used sparingly. He returned to the inner room with a bowl. The steaming rice porridge was interspersed with scattered wild vegetables, giving off a faint smell of rice. Maybe it was not good, but the plum fish could not wait to eat. The rice porridge is a little meager, with a little wild vegetables. It tastes light and rough. It's clear that a large bowl of rice porridge has entered the stomach, and even the stomach is bulging, but Li Yuling doesn't feel full. Li Yu knows that he is lacking in oil and water. Anyone who can't eat meat for a whole year, has little soup and water all day, and doesn't have enough to eat, is prone to this situation. However, what Li Yu urgently needs to solve at present is not the problem of eating, but how he should spend this winter. It is now the 12th month of winter, and there is not much food in the Yizhuang. His body is too thin and weak. Once there is heavy snow blocking the mountains or a cold or fever comes, it will definitely be a deadly thing. And last night's masked kidney transplant was also a big trouble. The masked man had already killed Li Yu. If he knew he was still alive, the consequences would be unimaginable. After all, even Li Yu himself doesn't know how he survived. "Brother Li, are you there?" After dinner, Li Yu briefly tidied up. It was freezing outside, and he had nothing to do. There were no entertainment activities in the village, so he was about to go to bed when he heard someone calling him outside. Upon opening the door, the visitor had thick eyebrows and big eyes, a tall and sturdy physique, and a long scar slanted across half of his face, resembling a ferocious flesh centipede, adding a touch of evil energy to him. At this moment, the person's face turned red with cold, and they were huddled in a tattered cotton jacket, constantly stomping their feet and breathing hot air into their hands. "Hey, young'un, why are you here? It's windy outside, come in quickly." Seeing the visitor, Li Yu quickly invited them into the room. Young'un is a villager from nearby Vajra village. He is tall and mature, but he is 1 year younger than Li Yu, who is 17 years old. He is also quite familiar with his predecessor. A few years ago, Yang En's father went hunting in the mountains and unexpectedly encountered a black bear. The bear was lying dead on the spot, but there was no complete body. People in this era are quite averse to the idea of having a complete corpse. Afterwards, the old cripple and Li Yu worked tirelessly for a whole day, sewing and repairing the remaining body to gather the entire body. Only then did Yang's father be able to bury the entire body. From then on, Yang En's grandfather and Yang En were very grateful to the old cripple and his predecessor. They often came to help with things they could do or give away things they needed for daily life. "No, it's not necessary." Yang En quickly shook his head and instinctively glanced at the dim hall behind Li Yu. The light inside was dim, and the several morgue beds and coffins that were set off were a bit gloomy. He didn't dare to look much, so he handed the cloth bag in his hand to Li Yu and said hesitantly, "Brother Li, my grandfather said that there may be heavy snow on the mountain in the coming days. It would be inconvenient for you to be alone in the village, so let me remind you and also bring you some corn flour." A ferocious and malevolent tall man, half a head taller than Li Yu, spoke with a hint of timidity in timidity, which seemed a bit strange. However, Li Yu was not surprised because Yang En had this personality since childhood. Some people may appear ferocious on the outside, but in reality, their inner selves are soft, kind, and timid. This is it. Li Yu hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take it over. At this time of year, ordinary people have to tighten their belts and eat frugally, and their household rations need to be calculated. Even the landlord's family may not have surplus food. At this moment, Yang En and his grandson could still think of him and bring food, which was a rare and valuable gesture of goodwill. "Okay, I'll take it then." Li Yu is not polite either. He is indeed lacking food now. Since the other party has already delivered it, he can accept it and repay it when there is a chance in the future. Perhaps due to digesting most of the memories of his predecessor, Li Yu now naturally integrates into his predecessor's identity without much discomfort. "By the way," he also said. "Also, when you go back later, please help me send a message to the old man to keep him warm. I'll go see him when the weather improves another day." Yang En was stunned for a moment, and he vaguely felt that Li Yu in front of him seemed somewhat different from before, because Li Yu had never said such things before. He quickly nodded and replied, "Hey, I got it." Yang En didn't stay much and quickly said goodbye and left. Watching Yang En go, Li Yu finally withdrew his gaze and looked at the bag of corn flour in his hand, revealing a faint smile. To be honest, the feeling of being cared for and cared for by others is really good. Li Yu turned around and returned to the Yizhuang. After closing the door, he was about to return to his room when his footsteps suddenly stopped and came to a stop. Just because on the morgue bed in front of him, the body under the white cloth had its arms stuck out again at some point. The sauce-purple corpse skin was tightly pressed against the bone, and the palms were as thin as chicken feet, revealing a hint of ferocity. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Yin Yang Wheel. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Yin Yang Wheel. Li Yu was stunned for a moment, his eyebrows furrowed, and his heart furrowed. At this moment, Li Yu remembered that these two corpses were both sent yesterday and had not yet been collected or arranged. He brought a copper lamp, which was an eternal light. It was the most precious thing passed down from the old cripple. It is said that it had been lit in a temple and had the effect of warding off evil and suppressing yin, but it is unknown whether it is true or false. Ignite the lamp, and a dim yellow light fills the entire room. The lamp oil is somewhat inferior, and when burned, it has an unpleasant smell. However, Li Yu inexplicably feels a lot of peace of mind. He lifted the white cloth and exposed the body below. This corpse is an old man with withered white hair, messy, and an emaciated body. His eyes are tightly closed, his face turns pale, and he is lifeless. The dim yellow light shone on his face, faintly revealing a hint of darkness. Li Yu first wiped the deceased's face with a piece of cloth soaked in water, tidied up his remains, hair, and clothes, and then dipped it in hot water to make the other person's elbow joint softer, folded and placed them properly. At this moment, he seemed to be speaking to himself. Dust returns to dust, soil returns to soil. Now that you have passed away, it's easy for you to walk along the way. To live, one needs dignity, to die, one needs dignity even more. As a bodyguard, Li Yu not only needs to guard the cemetery, receive and take care of corpses, but also needs to know how to collect corpses and organize their remains. In this way, only the living can have peace of mind, and the dead can have dignity. Once a person dies, everything is settled. Regardless of what happened during their lifetime, the deceased must be given a complete ending. This is comfort for the living and respect for the dead. As soon as Li Yu finished speaking, I don't know if it was his illusion. He noticed that the deceased's face seemed to have become much more peaceful, and even the body odor seemed to have faded a bit, without the gloomy feeling he had just had. In a daze, Li Yu seemed to see a huge wheel, its surface emitting black and white radiance, slowly rotating like the yin-yang Tai Chi diagram. Under the radiance, the surface of the pale blue wheel is covered with ancient and mottled marks, as if all things in heaven and earth, sun, moon, stars, and the cycle of life and death are included in it. A voice as indifferent and desolate as a deity echoed in my mind. Life and death are not determined by human beings. Death is like a lamp extinguished. Collecting the body, understanding cause and effect, the living find peace, and the dead find liberation, funeral reward. Tiger head mask. Then, Li Yu's arms bulged and something was added. What's the situation? Li Yu was startled. He seemed to have seen and heard something amazing just now. Li Yu instinctively pulled out something, which turned out to be a mask. This mask is carved from wood and has a surface covered with cracks. It is gray and can be vaguely seen that it depicts a grinning tiger face. Tiger head mask quality. Non-mainstream. Introduction. Lang Wu's parents died when he was young, and he grew up eating from 100 families. He had already blurred the appearance of his parents, but he only remembered the scene when his father, a carpenter, carved this mask for him when he was 5 years old, which was his only memory. He has been alone for over 50 years, from a strong young man to an old man with gray hair, which can be said to have been a miserable life. However, this tiger mask has always accompanied him and has become a comfort for his soul. As his gaze touched, a message slowly flowed through his heart, and Li Yu slowly rubbed his rough mask, his gaze flickering. Although this mask is worn out, the appearance of this object means that he can earn rewards by mortifying corpses. This is quite shocking. What exactly is this yin-yang wheel? At this moment, Li Yu's heart pounded violently, recalling something. Could it be that my ability to come to this world and the resurrection of this body are all related to this thing? He tried to calm himself down quickly. It may not sound good to say that I earn rewards by embalming the dead, but it seems that I was originally earning money from the dead. For me, it's a professional match. In this rural area, it is not uncommon to see corpse guards like Li Yu. The bodyguards are taking care of the corpses in the cemetery, which can be considered a trick at least, but the vast majority of bodyguards have struggled for a lifetime and their income is not very high. Yizhuang is a place where corpses are placed, and the families of the deceased often give some money as a token of gratitude. But he is in the countryside, surrounded by poor people. Those who died often bury themselves in the ground with a roll of grass mat, and he rarely meets a few generous family members of the deceased throughout the year. The emergence of the yin-yang roulette wheel now means that Li Yu has an additional source of wealth, which can be considered as having the foundation to settle down and survive. At this moment, Li Yu suddenly felt much more at ease. Since coming into this world, the feeling of helplessness and unease that has grown deep within me has gradually disappeared. A gentleman does not take away people's love. Although I am not a gentleman, I cannot do such a thing. Since this tiger head mask is your favorite thing, you should keep it for yourself. After all, this tiger head mask is the spiritual sustenance of an old man. Li Yu is not interested in this thing, so he naturally has no intention of claiming it as his own. He placed it in Lang Wu's arms and covered it with a white cloth. In another 2 days, people from Vajra village will come to take Lang Wu's body for burial and will not continue to store it here to occupy space. Then, Li Yu set his gaze on the coffin next to him. Lang Wu is just a poor old bachelor who received a tiger head mask after being buried. So, what reward will this old tavern shopkeeper's son receive after being buried? Li Yu rubbed his hands and inexplicably gained some anticipation in his heart, along with a hint of fear towards the 2 corpses disappearing without a trace. What kind of cold and stiff corpse is this? It's obvious that it's a great philanthropist who gives benefits and warmth. It gave him a strange feeling of opening a blind box, even though this thought was somewhat disrespectful to the deceased. Pushing open the lid of the coffin, inside was an ordinary middle-aged man in his 30s, who could still vaguely smell some alcohol. Still following the same steps as before, Li Yu carefully sorted out his clothes, remains, combed his hair, and even dug out a bit of black mud from his mouth and nostrils. He did this very seriously, and was also very skilled and meticulous. This is the professional skill that the old cripple taught him. 1 code to 1 code. Let's not worry about the reward for embalming corpses for now. Since you have eaten the bowl of food from the corpse guardian, you must fulfill your duty and do what he should do. Otherwise, it will be disrespectful to the deceased and also disrespectful to yourself. Then Li Yu, in a daze, once again saw a pale blue wheel slowly turning, with its surface covered in mottled and ancient marks, as if it had been baptized by time and space. The roulette wheel emits a black and white radiance, like a yin-yang tai chi diagram, where life and death rotate, and all things in the world are within it. A voice that echoed as indifferent and desolate as a fairy, demon, god, or Buddha. Life and death are not determined by human beings. Death is like a lamp extinguished. Collecting the body, understanding cause and effect, the living find peace, and the dead find liberation. Corpse burial reward. Zhuanggu Jiufang. Zhuanggu Jiufang quality. Normal. Introduction. This is a recipe that has been cherished by the old tavern for many years, and it is the lifeblood of the old shopkeeper's family. Can use ordinary old wine and a few medicinal herbs to brew a delicious medicinal wine. It also has the effects of pulling out tendons and strengthening bones, strengthening the waist and tonifying the kidneys. For men, it has an unimaginable attraction. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. The Last Wish of the Dead. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 The Last Wish of the Dead. Meanwhile, a recipe for how to make medicinal wine appeared in Li Yu's mind. There are no special requirements for the wine used in this recipe, but it must be made from sorghum. As for the medicinal herbs, there are only a few flavors, which are not particularly precious. In addition to these medicinal herbs, there is also a fruit pit called black pearl fruit in the mountains. Feng Zili provides detailed records on how to select materials, how to brew, and how to control the proportion of ingredients, which can be said to be full of details. Good thing. Li Yu's eyes lit slightly. It doesn't really matter what it means to strengthen the waist and kidney. The main thing is to pull out tendons and strengthen bones, strengthen the body, which is the most important thing. After all, that man doesn't want to have a good waist and a good physique. Just as Li Yu was overjoyed, the light in front of him dimmed. He seemed to see a spot of light flying from inside Chenjua's body, directly blending into his eyebrows. Then, a scene unfolded before his eyes. The night is dark and the wind is high, and the bright moon is hanging high. On a street, a figure was walking unsteadily, and it was Chenjua who could be seen in the moonlight just now. Chenjua's face turned red, his eyes were blurred, and he was still holding a wine bag in his hand, as if muttering something in his mouth. After walking a distance, a figure quietly followed him and pushed him behind him. Chenjua stood unsteadily and plunged into the nearby ditch. There was water in the ditch, although it was not deep, it had formed a thick layer of ice. Chenjua smashed the ice surface with one head and plunged into the water. Suddenly, he was awakened by the cold. He struggled to get up, but the ice was slippery and cold, his body was soaked, his whole body was cold, and he even took a few sips of ice water, but he couldn't get up. After tossing and turning for a while, as he was about to crawl out of the ditch, a hand suddenly pressed against his head and pushed him into the water again. Struggling for a moment, Chenjua gradually lost consciousness. Not long after, Chenjua lay motionless on the water with his face down, his body gradually becoming cold and stiff. The scene gradually dissipated, and Li Yu regained his senses. His face was a bit shocked, and his heart felt cold. Chenjua in this coffin did not die unexpectedly, but was killed by someone. Moreover, Li Yu had already seen the appearance of the person who killed Chenjua, and he happened to know him. My predecessor used to occasionally go to the old tavern in town to buy wine for the old cripple. Coincidentally, the murderer happened to be from the old tavern. This person's name is Chen Ji, and he is Chenjua's cousin and also the nephew of the old shopkeeper. He often helps in taverns. This guy lost his father and mother at a young age, and was pulled up by the old shopkeeper. I don't know why he would attack his cousin. However, in Li Yu's heart, a strange message appeared. Chenjua's last wish explanation. As you can see, Chenjua's death was not an accident, but a homicide. This incident became Chenjua's biggest obsession before his death, and he was filled with resentment before his death. So, if someone can help him expose this matter and prevent him from dying unjustly, he will receive a certain reward. Reward. A jar of bone-strengthening medicinal wine. Is it possible to obtain rewards by fulfilling the deceased's last wishes or attachments, or is there such an operation? Li Yu felt a little uneasy in his heart and said, it seems that there are many secrets to this yin-yang roulette. Li Yu closed the coffin lid and fell into contemplation. This can certainly be done, but it requires long-term consideration. After all, he is still just an ordinary corpse guardian, and any unexpected incident could bring him great trouble. It is best not to expose oneself. In the afternoon, it was freezing outside, and there were still 2 corpses lying in the room. However, Li Yu felt a lot more at ease now. With nothing to do, he simply lay in bed with his eyes closed and focused, conserving his energy. By the way, I started pondering on some of the next plans. There are 3 things in front of him. 1. Investigate and guard against the masked individuals who killed their predecessors to avoid exposing their own resurrection after death. 2. Prepare enough food and firewood for oneself to survive the winter. 3. Help Chenhua fulfill his last wish. The first thing is very troublesome. The masked black figure can cut open the skin and flesh with just one palm, and it's easy to dig his heart and kidneys, indicating that the other person is not an ordinary person. However, he is in a hurry and useless. He can only prepare as much as possible and secretly find a way to investigate. The second thing is urgent. Not being in charge of the household knows that firewood and rice are expensive. Although this is a world with extraordinary power, he is only an ordinary person now, and his physical weakness is weak. The little thing under the bed, along with the corn flour sent by Yang'an, can at most sustain him for more than 10 days. Without food, he would starve to death directly. And now that it's winter, firewood is also a problem. As for the third thing, it should indeed be done. After all, a jar of medicinal wine that can nourish the body and strengthen bones is also of great use to him. The next day, the weather improved and the sun rose. The temperature began to rise, and even the ice in the water tank melted. Li Yu looked at himself through the reflection in the water. In the water, he was wrapped in a thick cotton jacket and wore a tattered cotton hat. His face was thin, his skin was dry and red, his lips were dry and cracked, and he had 2 cold, black and cracked ears. He looked really ugly and tight, like a thin old man, not a 17-year-old boy. After simply patting his stomach, Li Yu took out a rusty firewood knife from the corner and placed it in his arms. Then, he carried 2 roasted sweet potatoes and an old water bag. He walked down the mountain road directly to Qingshui town. Yizhuang is about 10 miles away from Qingshui town, and Li Yu takes a break before arriving at Qingshui town near noon. Qingshui town is the core of more than 10 surrounding villages, with shops, rice shops, inns, taverns, blacksmiths, and medical clinics on both sides of the street. Some nearby villagers often come here to buy things they need. On the street, it is said that it is not lively, but there are occasional pedestrians coming and going. Li Yu, with his hands crossed, lowered his head, pretended to pass by the entrance of the old tavern. His gaze swept over and he saw the old shopkeeper wearing a felt hat on the counter, calculating and calculating, looking dazed. The original old shopkeeper, although old, had a rosy face all day long, with flesh on his cheeks and black hair in his white hair, which was considered old and robust. However, now the old man's face is haggard, with all his hair turned white and his mind is somewhat dazed. It is obvious that the white-haired person gave the black-haired person away. In addition to the old shopkeeper, Li Yu also saw Chen Ji, who was holding a cup of tea and looking at the old shopkeeper with a heart-wrenching expression, asking for warmth and comfort. Those who don't know the truth thought he was the real son of the old shopkeeper. "I never forget to perform, this guy has a lot of scenes," Li Yu exclaimed in surprise. Li Yu didn't look much, pretended to pass by casually, and then found a secluded place to hide. Until evening, Li Yu ate the sweet potato in his arms and drank some water, which was enough to fill his stomach. He estimated that the tavern was now closing. He walked out and came to the vicinity of the tavern. Sure enough, the tavern is currently closing and Chen is busy locking the door. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Pawn Shadow. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Pawn Shadow. As for the old shopkeeper, he was a bit absent-minded and was slowly heading home. The house he lives in is not far away. If there is any movement, you can see it by opening the window at night. In addition, he has some connections with the town constables, so ordinary thieves dare not offend him. Li Yu pulled his hat down and covered his face, pretending to walk across from the old shopkeeper. As the two approached, Li Yu stuffed something into each other's hands and then turned around without looking back. The old shopkeeper was a bit stunned. He opened his palm and saw a piece of rag. Upon opening up, 5 jet black characters, written on black charcoal, came into view. Killer Chen Ji. The old shopkeeper's face trembled, his body shook, and he almost fell to the ground. He is also a person who has half of his body buried in the ground. He has been doing business for most of his life and has never seen anything before. Previously, although he vaguely suspected that the cause of his son's death was not simple, there was no evidence, and his own son was indeed addicted to alcohol. He drank too much in the middle of the night and often didn't stay at home. This happened from time to time, so he didn't think much about it. But now someone reminds him of some recent events and doubts, and he suddenly realizes them. I only have one son myself. Once my son dies, if he kicks his legs and goes back to the West, who is the most likely person to have the savings of his lifetime in the tavern fall on? Someone has set their sights on the family background of his old Chen family. Uncle, what's wrong with you? Chen Qi locked the door and saw the old shopkeeper standing still. He quickly ran over to help. It's nothing, let's go. The old shopkeeper calmly gathered the rag in his hand, turned around and only saw a blurry figure. He glanced at his good nephew, who had become more and more attentive recently. A cold light flashed in his dim and murky eyes, and he stumbled towards home. On the other side, Li Yu tightened his collar and was already walking back to Yizhuang. The night was pitch black, and the moonlight was dim. There was no one else on the road except Li Yu. Ga 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 at night, the cold wind howled, and the faint cries of night owls could be heard from the wastelands and forests on both sides, piercing and piercing, making people's hair cold. Inheriting the memories of his predecessor, even the dead had seen hundreds of them, but Li Yu didn't care. Now, with my reminder, as long as the old innkeeper of the tavern is not old and confused, he will definitely investigate this matter thoroughly, and perhaps find a way to find someone to control Chen first. In this way, my task has also been considered completed. While thinking, Li Yu silently strode on his way. But halfway through, Li Yu suddenly stopped in his tracks, his heart trembling slightly, and a layer of white sweat erupted from his back. Because he clearly noticed that a pale shadow appeared in the pond not far from the roadside at some point. With disheveled hair, it seems like a woman. But at night, it's in the wilderness, and whose family's women would appear in such a place? Damn it, wouldn't it be so unlucky? Did I really run into a ghost? Li Yu's heart pounded violently, both shocked and taken for granted. Incredible creatures such as the Yin Yang will have appeared, and he himself has also been reborn from the dead, crossing boundaries and rebirth. It doesn't seem strange that a few demons and evil spirits have emerged now. Li Yu quickly reached into his arms, clenched the firewood knife, and lifted his heart. Don't panic at this time. He didn't dare to look too much, let alone stop and continue walking forward, but he could feel a resentful gaze falling on him, which was very mysterious and subtle. Fortunately, even when Li Yu walked away, Bai Ying did not make any moves. It's okay. Sensing the disappearance of his gaze behind him, Li Yu breathed a sigh of relief and felt lingering palpitations. Although he had long known that there was an extraordinary power in this world, the terrifying experience just now still made him both surprised and afraid. In his previous life, he skipped classes and went online during school, went fishing and swimming in the river, and caught snakes and rabbits on the mountain. He played wildly. In college, his family was demolished and he received a huge sum of money, so he had no worries about food and clothing since then. In half a lifetime, I have been safe and sound, and have never encountered any danger except for choking on a few sips of water while swimming in the river. But in this world, just occasionally taking a night walk at night and hitting a ghost. Staying well in the Yizhuang, he was interrupted by a kidney transplant guest, which made him realize the danger of this world. Returning to Yizhuang, Li Yu was tired, hungry, and cold. The thing I ate in the evening has been digested long ago. Thinking of the bland sweet potatoes, corn flour, and dried wild vegetables under the bed, Li Yu sighed and lost all appetite. I also thought of the trembling, fat and not greasy braised pork belly in the previous life, roast duck with a crispy outside and tender inside, and a rich taste stewed beef brisket with tomatoes and potatoes, with a delicious taste and rich broth. Liu swallowed a mouthful of water, as if scratching his heart with 100 claws at this moment, feeling even more uncomfortable. He doesn't have many hobbies, except for a common problem among men. He likes to see beautiful women, all he has is a greedy mouth. Liu felt a bit depressed. After thinking for a moment, he lit the oil lamp and went to a withered old tree behind the charity village with a firewood knife. He set the oil lamp aside and started digging the soil with the firewood knife. If he remembers correctly, before the beginning of winter this year, his predecessor had seen a snake crawl into this pile of soil. Snakes have a habit of hibernation. Now that it's winter and the weather is freezing, the flexibility and danger of snakes are definitely greatly reduced. That's right, Liu plans to eat snakes. If you want to have a bite of meat, you have to endure the harsh winter. However, eating snakes is not a big deal. In some areas of his past life, he ate them in a variety of ways, much more fiercely than him. For example, beef offal soup, dried mouse, frog juice, and live beads. But these are actually nothing. Some places are even more vibrant. Canned herring, pickled puffins, 3 squeaks, charcoal grilled baboons, and eating live fish are truly impressive things to experience firsthand. After some effort, I finally managed to dig open the soil and there was indeed a snake inside. This snake can be as thick as a duck egg, with grayish scales and black light, coiled in a plate with its head in the middle. Liu found a branch and lifted it away. At this moment, the black snake was still a bit confused, moving slowly. However, the next moment, a firewood knife hit it directly on the head. The head was attacked, and the snake's body began to curl and struggle. Liu ignored it and hit its head again, then carried the snake's tail back to the village. At this point, the black snake was no longer wriggling and had become soft to tread on. Under the light of the oil lamp, Liu found a crooked and rusty needle, strung a thread on it, and carefully began to sew the torn snake skin on the snake's head. After sewing it up, wipe off the dried bloodstains and brain fluid, and then roll the snake corpse into a plate, organizing it briefly. Then the funeral is over, and Liu received a reward for the funeral. A portion of snake venom. Snake venom quality. Poor quality. Introduction. This is a snake venom extracted from the venom sac of a black snake. It is not particularly toxic, but has a strong paralyzing effect. After simple extraction, it can be stored for a long time. I felt like there was something extra in my arms. When I took it out, it was a paper bag with some gray-white powder inside. Liu fell silent. I just feel like I've opened the door to a new world. It turns out that not only humans, but animals can also. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Pitying the Heart of Parents in the World. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Pitying the heart of parents in the world. After harvesting the wool, the snake corpse cannot be wasted. This snake is big enough, and after clearing its internal organs, it still has 3 or 4 pounds of meat. Liu simply cut off half of his body, left half hanging on the bedroom beam, and the remaining half scraped off the snake's scales and chopped into sections, directly making snake soup. There is no seasoning inside, only a little salt for seasoning. After making it, the fresh and tender snake meat is wrapped in snake skin, rolled up, and the surface of the snake soup is still floating with oil stains. Taking a sip, although the taste was a bit light, it was very fresh, especially the pieces of snake meat, tender and juicy, trembling and trembling. Eating it in his mouth made him very satisfied, and the plump fish tongue almost swallowed it. Compared to the bland and rough rice and wild vegetables, this snake meat is simply the ultimate delicacy. Eat the snake meat thoroughly and even drink the soup to the fullest. Wash the dishes and put them away, close the door, and Liu enters the bed. Thinking of the suspicious white shadow he saw on the way back from town, Li Yu felt lingering fear and placed the firewood knife next to his pillow. Chai Dao may not be able to deal with the evil and evil spirits, but at least it can provide him with a sense of security. Li Yu estimated that it should be 10 o'clock now. If it were a past life, at this time he would be lying on the sofa holding his phone and leisurely scrolling through short videos. However, in this world, apart from child making, the poorest families at the bottom of society seem to have no popular nighttime entertainment activities. And staying up late is not a good habit either. Keeping the blanket well, Li Yu fell asleep in a daze. Nothing happened overnight. In the next few days, apart from Lang Wu's body being taken away and buried by the villagers of Guijia village, nothing special happened. However, Li Yu has not been idle these days. Taking advantage of the fact that it has not snowed heavily, he carried a firewood knife and cut a lot of dry firewood in the back mountain, neatly stacking it in the corner of the wall. By the way, I also made some simple traps, set up a pheasant and a rabbit, and caught several hibernating snakes, toads, and so on. As for the collection of corpses, it can only be said that it is not worth mentioning. And with the help of Yang'an, Li Yu simply cleared a small piece of land in front of the Yizhuang, intending to plant some fruits and vegetables in the spring of the following year. Li Yu understood clearly that if he came, he would settle down. Since he had already arrived in this world, he should integrate into it as soon as possible. In addition, the female ghost from the previous few nights has still left Li Yu with lingering palpitations and some unease. He also thought about whether he should learn some martial arts, Taoist techniques, etc. to enhance his own strength and protect himself. But let's not talk about the elusive Taoist powers. Speaking of martial arts alone, Li Yu only knows that in these 10 miles and 8 villages, except for the Constable Huang and the Constable Lao Chu in the town, only a few hunters in the mountains have learned some martial arts. The only one left was Li De, who was killing pigs in the town. When he was young, he worked as a bodyguard and learned a few basic techniques. As the saying goes, being poor in literature and rich in martial arts. To learn martial arts, one must first have money, and at least ensure that one regularly eats meat and supplements nutrition, so as to make the body stronger. Otherwise, even if you are lucky enough to learn martial arts from martial arts schools or escort agencies, without sufficient meat and nutrition supply, over time, you will overdraw your blood and potential, directly rendering yourself useless. If it is in a modern society with abundant resources, naturally there is not much problem. In such an environment where one can't even eat enough and can't eat meat a few times a year, it's almost impossible for an ordinary family to support a warrior. Only a few wealthy rural households and local tycoons may be able to afford to support 1 or 2 serious warriors. If martial artists want to go further, they also need precious medicinal materials such as tiger bones, snow lotus, leopard fetuses, ginseng, and bear bile to nourish the body, replenish vitality, and strengthen tendons and bones. These are all speculations made by Li Yu based on what the old cripple once said. It's not easy for Li Yu to learn martial arts. Firstly, he has no money, and secondly, where he will learn martial arts is also a question. If I could obtain the corpses of several warriors, after burying them, I wonder if I could scrape away the martial arts skills from those warriors' bodies. Li Yu's mind suddenly flashed with such a thought. On that day, Li Yu had just woken up, had something to eat, and was sitting at the doors sunbathing when he saw a group of people walking from a distance with heavy faces, some of whom were still holding thick and long wooden sticks in their hands. Behind these people, there was also an old man with a withered face and grey hair. This is the old innkeeper of the tavern. Li Yu's gaze fixed and he quickly got up to greet him. Arriving at the old shopkeeper's side, Li Yu bowed slightly and said, "Young Li Yu has seen my father. In law. The old man is getting old, and after walking a section of the mountain road, he is already panting and sweating." He waved his hand and said, "Little brother Li, you don't need to be polite. I came today for my unfilial son." After speaking, he choked up a bit, and his 2 cloudy old eyes were filled with tears, filled with grief. Li Yu sighed in his heart, unsure of what to say. Poor parents in the world. For parents, there is probably nothing more tragic than sending someone with white hair to someone with black hair. When he arrived at the cemetery, the old shopkeeper had someone push open the coffin and saw Chenjua's stiff and lifeless face. He remained silent for a moment before suddenly slapping him. Pop. A crisp sound. This slap landed firmly on Chenjua's face. After finishing smoking, the old shopkeeper suddenly burst into tears and a breakdown of emotions. You're not filial. Everyone remained silent and allowed the old shopkeeper to vent his anger. After a while, the old shopkeeper reluctantly regained his composure, stood up trembling, then waved his hand to have the coffin closed and carried away. When the laborers carrying coffins left, the old shopkeeper handed Li Yu a palm-sized cloth bag and patted his shoulder. My son owes a lot to my brother's care these days. This is my heart. Feeling the heavy cloth bag in his hand, Li Yu's heart moved slightly and said, Old shopkeeper, isn't this too much? The old shopkeeper waved his hand and turned to leave. There's one more thing. As he walked to the door, he turned his head slightly and gave Li Yu a determined look. The cause of my unfilial son's death has been determined. It was my nephew who did it. He has now been arrested and brought to justice by the town constable Chu. From then on, the matter has come to an end. Goodbye. After speaking, he stumbled away. Only Li Yu felt lost in thought in place. For a long time, he shook his head and sighed, Jiang is still old and spicy. Fortunately, I even deliberately covered it up before and didn't show my true face. I didn't expect this old shopkeeper to see it out. It could also be guessed. Just thinking about it, this old shopkeeper has been doing business for most of his life. He has never seen anyone before and is also a mature and sophisticated person. It's not surprising to see something. Opening the cloth bag, there were several scattered silver coins and copper coins inside, and Li Yu suddenly smiled. He roughly estimated that these could be around 2 taels of silver, which added up to a considerable amount of money. This world uses precious metals such as gold, silver, and copper as its currency. 1 tael of gold equals 10 taels of silver, and 1 tael of silver equals 1,001, which is equivalent to 1 hanging. In addition, the purchasing power of this penny is stronger than that of Li Yu in his previous life. It can buy a big meat bun with full materials, or a string of tomatoes on sticks, or 2 thick cakes. With this money, Li Yu can safely survive this winter. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Black Handprint. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Black Handprint. Of course, wealth is not exposed. This money cannot be disclosed rashly, otherwise it may cause him fatal harm. In recent years, the grain cultivated by ordinary people themselves has been stripped of various taxes such as grain and grain taxes, and then taken away by wealthy individuals, even gangs and bandits. At most, the remaining food is enough for our own family to chew. In order to save food, we often only eat 2 meals a day, or even 1 meal. In times of poor harvests, the laborers at home have to find ways to work hard and earn a few big suns to exchange for rice bran and sorghum flour. Even selling children and women is not uncommon. Even so, many people still have to starve to death every year. If he goes shopping every now and then, he will definitely be eye-catching and likely to be noticed soon. A helpless bodyguard, holding a sum of money in his hand, is seen by some as a fat sheep. In addition, Chenjua's last wish has been resolved, and now Li Yu has also received compensation. Just now, the old shopkeeper finished speaking, and Li Yu received the reward for helping the deceased fulfill their last wishes. Chenjua's last wish status completed. Reward: a jar of bone-strengthening medicinal wine. At this moment, Li Yu looked towards the corner of the room. There is a jar of medicinal wine, which is dusty and about a foot high. The mouth of the jar is tightly sealed. After Li Yu opened it, he saw that the wine inside was light yellow in color, without any impurities, and a fragrance of wine mixed with medicine rushed towards his face. He took a bowl and poured out some, about a mouthful. After taking a sip, the taste was soft, with a perfect blend of mellow and medicinal aromas, leaving a lingering aftertaste. Not long after, a wave of heat rose from his stomach, warm and comfortable. In the winter, a thin layer of sweat broke out on his forehead. What a great wine! Li Yu exclaimed in admiration, then carefully sealed the jar mouth and moved the jar to the bedroom. However, even if it has the effect of nourishing the body, this wine is not easy to drink too much. It is best to drink a little every morning and evening in the future, as it can not only ward off cold but also nourish the body. Young people are at the age of growing their bodies. With this jar of medicinal wine, combined with regular sleep patterns and sufficient food, one can quickly cultivate a healthy and strong body. These are just a few zombie bed boards, they're empty again. Glancing at the empty wooden bed, Li Yu shook his head. With the yin-yang roulette, he can benefit from mortifying corpses. However, a skillful woman can't make bricks without straw. If his yin and yang wheel is awesome, it is useless without a corpse. With money, Li Yu will not mistreat himself. I specifically went down the mountain to the town and bought a bucket of rice, a bag of salt, a small jar of lard, and 2 dry cured meats, which added a bit of flavor to the food. During this period, he also specially brought a piece of cured meat and a pot of old wine to visit Yang En's grandfather. This old man's full name is Yang Feng. When he was helping the landlord's house to herd cattle, he was accidentally trampled on by a cow and injured his leg. At that time, he didn't have the money to treat it, so he fell ill from then on. Later, he limped and couldn't move around. Later, due to the loss of a son, he was hit and his physical condition deteriorated daily. But now Mr. Yang's spirit and energy are quite good. Seeing Li Yu holding wine and meat to see him, he was very happy and quickly asked his grandson to take out the pickled vegetables he had pickled last year, steam a few steamed buns, and specially stir-fry the cured meat. He found half a plate of leftover fennel beans and warmed the old wine. The 3 of them sat together, starting to drink and eat meat. Li Yu and Mr. Yang Feng chatted, while Yang En only focused on eating with his head down. A skinny old yellow dog crouched under the table, drooling under the scent of cured meat, constantly wagging its tail. Mr. Yang Feng didn't seem to be very interested in meat, he just picked up a chopstick and stopped picking it up. Then he drank wine in small sips, chatting with Li Yu from time to time, and watching the 2 of them feast on it with a smile on his face. He is not happy to have wine and meat to eat, but besides his grandson, there are still people who remember him as an old cripple in their hearts. This person, once physically disabled or encountering major changes, will inevitably become very sensitive and better able to appreciate the good and bad of others. Isn't there a saying like this? In times of adversity, we see true love, and over time we see the heart. After eating and drinking enough, Li Yu returned to the village. Before leaving, he even said to come back for a while and bring some tonic wine for the old man. The old man's smile grew stronger upon hearing this, and his folds were squeezed into chrysanthemums, even saying, "Good child." If we talk about the effect of this bone-strengthening medicinal wine, it is indeed good. In addition, the food is full of oil and water, and it can be contaminated with meat and fish every day. Therefore, these days, Li Yu's appetite has opened up, and he feels more energetic. He sleeps soundly, and his body seems to have some strength. That morning, Li Yu had breakfast and finished drinking medicinal wine. He was feeling a bit smoked and sitting at the doors sunbathing when he saw several people pulling a cart towards Yizhuang. Behind him followed a middle-aged woman, crying and wailing. Li Yu's heart moved and he quickly got up. As a few people approached, Li Yu saw a 7 or 8-year-old child lying on the cart, with a pale complexion, a slightly swollen body, and water dripping from his hair. However, there was a jet black mark on his ankle, which looked a bit slender, like a woman's handprint, quite ferocious. Seeing this dark handprint, Li Yu felt a thump in his heart and inexplicably had an ominous premonition. Among the few people, the leader was a tall and sturdy middle-aged man, with long hands and feet, about 30 years old, dressed in coarse cloth and thick clothes, relatively neat. He carried a hunting bow on his back, an arrow bag slung around his waist, and a short knife beside him. His rough and large hands were covered in calluses, and his eyes were bright with a sharp color, giving him a refined temperament. This person Li Yu knows is Guoshouxin, the son of the village chief of Guojia village. In this ancient society, the clan system prevailed and imperial power did not go to the countryside. The power of the lower class has always been in the hands of the landlords and gentry, outside of the clan members in the villages and towns. The village head of this Guo family village is also a respected clan elder of the Guo family. He specially gave his son money and connections to go to the martial arts school in the neighboring county to learn some martial arts. In addition, he has a family tradition of hunting skills, so Guoshouxin is still a well-known hunter from afar. It is said that even the blind bear has hunted Guoshouxin. Guoshouxin looked at Li Yu and said, "Brother Li, the second dog from our village is on the cart. This child was playing by the pond yesterday and accidentally fell into the water. It was only discovered this morning. Let's temporarily place it with you. After the coffin is ready in a few days, someone will come and take it away." Li Yu said, "This is nature, I will take good care of him." Guoshouxin nodded and stopped speaking. In his eyes, Li Yu was just a bodyguard guarding the cemetery, still a lowly person, and also a young boy, so there was naturally no need for casual conversation. Li Yu pointed to the black handprint and curiously said, "But what's going on?" Seeing the jet black handprint, Guoshouxin's face looked a bit unnatural. He hesitated for a moment, glanced at him, and wrote lightly, "It's nothing, it just fell." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The Last Wish of Two Dogs. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The Last Wish of Two Dogs. Did you fall? Are you fucking blind as an old man? Can't you tell this is a human fingerprint? Li Yu's mouth twitched, but he didn't ask much. He knew this guy was just unwilling to say more. Guoshouxin gave Li Yu an extra glance. For Li Yu, he had seen it before. In the past, Li Yu was timid, afraid to look at others and stumbling when speaking. Li Yu now has a calm and natural expression, a clear and organized speech, and a calm demeanor far beyond his age between his eyebrows, as if he had changed his personality. But Guoshouxin didn't pay much attention to it either. The mere corpse guardian is just an inconspicuous person and not worth much attention. The body was placed on the morgue, and the parents of Ergo cried and cried for a while before finally leaving reluctantly. The others also followed and left. Seeing everyone leave, Li Yu looked at the pale-faced second dog and shook his head with pity, sighing. At such a young age, he had not yet witnessed the wonders of the world and passed away early. This little guy is also pitiful. Next, it is natural to start embalming and organizing the remains of the two dogs. Li Yu took out the Changming lamp and lit it. Next, take off the clothes from Ergo's body, wash them clean, hang them up, boil hot water, take a towel and start wiping Ergo's skin. After wiping it clean, use a comb to comb his hair once. Wait for the clothes to dry before putting them on. Finally, the body was arranged neatly to make its face calm, and both arms were placed steadily on both sides of the body. So, the funeral can be considered as the end. The gaze touched the black handprint on the ankles of the two dogs, and Li Yu showed a pensive expression. Based on what Guoshouxin said earlier, these two dogs should have drowned in the pond. Thinking about the terrifying white figure he encountered while passing by the pond when he returned from town a few days ago, Li Yu felt that the death of these two dogs was likely related to that terrifying white figure. Just as Li Yu was pondering, the yin-yang wheel passed by in a daze, and the reward arrived as promised. Corpse burial reward. A worn-out tambourine. Worn rattle drum, quality. Non-mainstream. Introduction. This is Ergo's favorite toy, which has accompanied him for several seasons. Although it has been damaged and cannot make a clear sound, it is of great significance to him. Liu looked at the tattered drum in his hand, shook his head helplessly, and casually put it aside. After all, he is an indifferent child, and he doesn't expect anything good from the other party. Unexpectedly, a light spot flew up from Ergo and penetrated into Liu's eyebrows. Then, a scene unfolded before his eyes. In the evening, the sun sets in the west, casting a vast orange glow. A thick layer of ice has formed on the pond, and several children are pouting their buttocks to smash the ice and catch fish, one of whom is Ergo. Several children's faces turned red and dark with cold, trembling but full of excitement. This pond connects to the Qingshui River, and there are also many fish in the water. One of them even held up a small fish in his hand and boasted, "Ha, there's a fish, I caught a fish." The other children were envious and used stones to smash the ice one after another. After a while, the few children all gained something, each with a happy smile on their face. Ergo, Pang Hu, my mother asked me to go home early, so I'll go back first. A child carrying 2 palm-sized fish waved excitedly and quickly left. Not long after, another child also left one after another, leaving only 2 dogs unwilling to smash the ice and catch fish everywhere. The sky gradually darkened, and beneath the ice, a white shadow appeared faintly, eerie and terrifying. However, the 2 dogs did not notice. He stood up and was about to change his position to continue smashing when suddenly the ice beneath his feet shattered with a click, causing him to fall into the water. Ah, help! Help! Cough! Ergo panicked and shouted for help as he tried to climb out, but the ice was slippery and cold. He not only failed to climb up, but also poured a few sips of cold water. At this moment, a dark green palm protruded from the water, with sharp nails. It grabbed the second dog's ankle and pulled him into the water. At first, Ergo struggled a few times, but over time, a large amount of ice water poured into his mouth and nose, causing him to gradually lose consciousness and sink to the bottom of the water, losing his breath. When Liu regained his senses, a strange message came to his mind. The last wish of Ergo explanation. In the year of a major disaster, the harvest was poor. In order to get through this winter, the Ergo family can only be frugal, and it is common to only eat 1 meal a day. The second dog, who had been awakened from hunger multiple times from his sleep and couldn't bear the hunger, suddenly started thinking of catching fish to fill his stomach. Although the elders in the village never let the children get close to this pond. Ergo died catching a fish, so he insisted on deep planting, hoping to get a fish, and it must be the fish in the pond that drowned him. Reward. The secret of 2 dogs. Liu blinked his eyes, somewhat surprised that Ergo was still lingering on his thoughts, still thinking about the fish in the pond. However, it seems normal to think about it. After all, he died from catching fish and was still hungry before his death. It's not surprising to have this obsession. Thinking of the white-clad female ghost in the water, Liu only felt a slight headache. If it's just catching fish, it's not a problem, but the key is that there are ghosts in the pond. I'm not a Taoist monk who can subdue demons and eliminate demons. If I get caught in just one fish, it's just injustice. However, it doesn't seem like there's absolutely no way out. Recalling the scene just now, Liu's eyes flickered and he keenly discovered something. The other children who were catching fish with Ergo were all unharmed, but Ergo only had an accident after dark because it was too late. Moreover, the last time I saw the female ghost was also at night, indicating that the female ghost should not appear during the day, especially when the sun was blazing. Moreover, I am only catching fish, not ghosts, which makes the difficulty much smaller. Since that's the case, there's still a way to handle it. However, since the elderly in the village are unwilling to let the children get close to this pond, there is obviously a reason. Well, let's first investigate the details of the female ghost. After pondering for a while, Li Yu came up with some ideas. "Old man, I came to see you again today." The next day, Li Yu, carrying a bag of jujube cake and not looking out at all, shouted while casually pushing the door into Yang En's yard. Just entered the yard, but felt that the atmosphere seemed a bit off. With a glance, I saw a young girl standing in the yard, in addition to Yang Feng, Yang Anya and his grandson, and an old yellow dog. This girl has a slender figure, but she is already at her first sight, with fair skin and a pretty appearance. The young girl was a bit panicked when she saw someone coming, and a blush quickly appeared on her face. She took a small bottle from Yang En's hand and quickly said, "Shaoan, my mother burned it a bit severely last night. I'll bring you this badger oil in a few days." "No, it's okay, Chuanqing. I have this thing at home. You can take it and use it all. It's okay. If it's not enough, I'll go fight badgers on the mountain again." Yang En stuttered and said. He looked at the handsome face in front of him, feeling that his heart was about to melt. His heart was both nervous and flustered, mixed with an indescribable sweetness. The girl shyly pursed her lips and smiled without responding, then greeted Mr. Yang and said, "Grandpa Yang, I'll go back first." After finishing speaking, he lowered his head and hurriedly left, feeling somewhat lost and fleeing. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. The Secret of Two Dogs. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. The Secret of Two Dogs. The old yellow dog smelled the aroma of jujube cake and rubbed its butt against the legs and feet of the plum fish, even wagging its tail as if pleasing. "Shaoan, tsk, this title is sweet enough." Li Yu crouched down and hugged the old yellow dog, vigorously stroking its head a few times. He looked up and smiled at Yang Feng sitting on the wooden chair. "Old man, it seems that I didn't come at the right time. The young girl Li Yu just now also knows her. She is Chuanqing, the daughter of Qian widow's family not far away. She is from the same village as Yang En and can be called a childhood sweetheart. Qian widow has a fierce personality and is a famous shrew from 8 villages 10 miles away. However, the daughter she gave birth to is handsome and gentle." Mr. Yang shook his head and said, "You kid." Yang En also recognized the teasing tone in Li Yu's words. He awkwardly scratched his scalp, unsure of what to say, and could only show a simple and honest smile. "Come on, you doll. What else are you bringing? You really treat the old man like an outsider." Seeing the jujube cake in Li Yu's hand, Mr. Yang knocked on his cane in dissatisfaction and said, "The things will be taken away later. Come to me early in the morning. There must be a problem. Tell me, what's up with you? Jiang is still old and spicy. As expected, nothing can be hidden from you." Li Yu gave a thumbs up and stood up, saying, "Actually, I want to ask you something." He spoke out everything in one fell swoop. "You should have heard about the drowning of the second dog in the pond in your village yesterday, right? The body of the second dog is now with me. However, I found a strange black handprint on his leg, which looks like it was left by a woman. If it's just that, it's okay." As he spoke, Li Yu's face turned strange and he said, "But one time I went to town before, when I came back at night, I met a female ghost in white by the water pond. Fortunately, I was far away at that time, so there was no danger. Last night, I couldn't sleep because I had been tossing and turning, and I always felt that this was really evil. You are very old and should know something, so I came to ask you about it." Li Yu has ideas on how to fulfill the last wish of Ergo, but before that, we still need to figure out the details of that female ghost. Since this female ghost dares to openly harm others by the pond, why hasn't anyone invited monks and Taoists to exorcise evil spirits and catch ghosts? Is this female ghost amazing in Taoist art? Or perhaps for other reasons? What, you've actually met that woman? Upon hearing these words, Yang Feng was first surprised and startled. He quickly calmed down and said, "The elderly people in the village actually know a little about this woman's situation. Her surname is Sun, and she is known as the Sun family. Then Yang Feng spoke in detail. This matter needs to start more than 30 years ago. At that time, there was a child born in Qingshui town. He had some talent, but his character was not very good. His parents had already made a private engagement with him, but they even flirted with the newly married Sun family. Then the two of them hooked up and soon the situation was exposed. The boy, concerned about his own reputation, moved out overnight. Instead, Sun was caught and soaked in a pig cage in a pond. The Sun family resented the young boy for abandoning her and running away. Before death, they were full of resentment. After being submerged in the water, their spirits did not disperse and they killed several people. Later, a wild road passed by and defeated them, causing them to retreat and flee. They never appeared for a long time. Who would have thought that the Sun family had reappeared now? Li Yu listened patiently and felt lost in thought. Yang Feng cautioned cautiously, "Li, the fierce and vicious nature of the ghost that Sun has transformed has already killed several lives. Don't provoke her. Having been trapped in the pond and died unjustly, it seems that this female ghost is mostly just a lonely and wild ghost. There is no support behind her, and she dare not appear during the day, indicating that her moral character is not high." Thinking this in her heart, Li Yu nodded and replied. "Don't worry, old man. I won't have to worry about it." Knowing Sun's background, he had a clear idea of what to do next, but it didn't prevent him from accepting the elderly person's kind reminder. After chatting with the old man for a while, he left the jujube cake and turned back to the village, ignoring the persuasion of his grandfather and grandson. Li Yu wandered around behind the Yizhuang and found a hibernating little snake. Release the snake blood and mix it with cooked rice to form a few dark red balls. Mix them with bait, emitting a faint fishy smell. Taking advantage of the clear and sunny weather at noon, Li Yu arrived at the previous pond with his simple fishing rod and bait made by himself. Although the sun is shining brightly now, as soon as Li Yu approaches this pond, he still feels a cool breeze, as if he is about to burrow into his bones. The ice on the water surface is thick and strong, with no signs of melting. And there were no birds or beasts chirping around, it was very quiet. Thinking of the white shadow in Ergo's memory, Li Yu inexplicably felt a chill in his heart. He always felt a pair of gloomy and cold eyes staring at him under the pond. However, Li Yu did not intend to approach, and he did not forget the vivid example of Ergo. Now it's clear sky and daylight, and he's not stepping on the ice. He's just fishing on the shore, so there shouldn't be any problem. Li Yu simply found a few stones, smashed a hole in the ice, and then stood on the shore, hanging the bait on the fishing hook and throwing it into the water. Then he sat on the shore and began to wait quietly. Fishing is a technical job. Skills are needed, patience is needed, and timing is even more important. Li Yu was not a professional fisherman in his previous life, but he had a friend named Yizhuang who was very fond of fishing. He went fishing every day, rain or shine, and never used air force. If he couldn't catch big fish, he would catch small fish. If he couldn't catch small fish, he would touch shrimp. If he couldn't pick wild vegetables, he would drink some water before walking. For this reason, his wife refused to let him in. Under the influence of listening and watching, Li Yu also knows some related skills to some extent. In winter fishing, all you need to do is break through the ice because of lack of oxygen, and the fish will come up to breathe. And blood bait also has a considerable attraction to fish. Sure enough, not long after, Li Yu felt the fishing rod in his hand sway slightly. When he pulled the rod, he indeed caught a palm-sized carp, and when he pulled it up, it was still bouncing around. Li Yu was overjoyed, picked the fish, and quickly returned to Yizhuang. Opening the white cloth, he placed the fish next to Ergo and rewarded it to the line. The last wish of Ergo status. Completed. Reward. The secret of 2 dogs. Quickly, Li Yu's head swelled, and out of thin air, a memory flashed through his mind like a lantern. In the scorching summer, the sun shines brightly, and cicadas chirp incessantly in the trees. It is noisy, and the hot and somewhat dull weather makes people drowsy. 2 dogs were hiding under the shade of a tree to cool off, while urinating in mud in the ant hole. At that moment, they saw a big man passing by in a field not far away. The big man had a tiger back and a bare waist, thick eyebrows and big eyes, and his muscles were bulging and firm. He also had a ferocious scar on his face, like a centipede. He held a long sword and looked full of evil energy. The scared little dog's face turned white and he quickly hid behind the tree, afraid to make a sound. On the left wrist of the great man, there was also a dark red ribbon tied, as if stained red with blood. However, this big man seems to have been seriously injured. He is panting heavily, his face is pale, his lips are purple, and his steps are unsteady and weak. His clothes on his chest and waist have been soaked with blood, and there are faintly visible black wounds with rolled skin and flesh. The 2 dogs watched as the big man walked away, and it wasn't until his figure disappeared in the direction of the mountain behind the village that he hurriedly ran back home. Memory ends here. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Red Scarf Thief. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 10. 5 Zang guests. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors.